Welcome. My name is Kelly Jones, Senior Vice President of HR here at the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank, and welcome to our public engagement forum. In a moment, I will introduce my esteemed panelists, but let's just set some brief context so we all know why we're here. It certainly is for the refreshments and obviously the networking, but also obviously we all know that President Harker's term will conclude on June 30th, 2025. And we kicked off a nationwide search beginning in September of this year. And really that search was intentional around public engagement, listening and understanding the thoughts and perspectives of many of you and what you have on your minds, as that will lead to our process with our search consultant, Spencer Stewart, and Tom Danis, who I'll introduce in a moment. As we set out on this search, we realized just how important public engagement is, and it's essential to get input from all of you and members of our district. Your feedback will help us refine the role profile that we've created, as well as give us some indicators of how we think about candidates and our search for candidates. Tonight's agenda will obviously go through some conversations with the board committee here. And then we'll obviously engage in discussions with you here in the room and our folks that are online through Teams. A couple housekeeping items for folks who are maybe new to this room in the orientation. You all have microphones in front of you. It feels very senatorial, so you're going to hit a button, it turns green, it lights up, and then you're good to go. And then for folks who are joining us online, we're utilizing Slido for your questions, and my colleague Marion here will help us to facilitate those questions coming in. So we're all good in that regard? All right, great. So before we meet our speakers here, we do have a short video that we'd like to share and show you that explains a bit more about the process and where we are on this journey.
The Federal Reserve System, our nation's central bank, comprises 12 independent regional reserve banks across the country and the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. Each reserve bank has its own board of directors and president. The board provides important information on regional business and credit conditions in support of monetary policymaking, and it oversees management of the reserve bank. The president is the chief executive officer and is responsible for all of the bank's activities, including monetary policy, bank supervision, economic research, payment services, distribution of coin and currency to financial institutions, and more. What happens when a reserve bank needs a new president? The selection process is laid out in federal law rooted in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Each reserve bank has a 9-member board with 3 kinds of directors, Class A, B, and C. The Board of Directors forms a search committee composed of its eligible Class B and Class C directors. These directors represent the public and are not affiliated with regulated banks or financial institutions. Since Class A directors are bankers, they are not permitted to take part in the selection of a reserve bank's president, nor are they allowed to sit on the search committee. Typically, the search committee works with an outside search firm to identify a diverse national pool of candidates with an appropriate blend of leadership, knowledge, and experience. The committee also gathers public input and candidate nominations during the search. Qualified candidates might come from higher education, nonprofits, financial institutions, or other businesses, or from within the Federal Reserve System itself. One trait they all share is a desire to serve the public. After gathering stakeholder input, interviewing candidates, and evaluating their qualifications, the search committee forwards the top candidates to the Board of Governors in Washington for review. That includes one-on-one meetings with each governor. Then, the Reserve Bank's eligible Class B and C directors, the non-bank directors, with sign-off from the Board of Governors, select the new Reserve Bank president. The new president then joins their Federal Reserve System colleagues in promoting price stability and maximum employment, serving the American people as part of our nation's central bank.
So to my immediate right is Tony Ibarguen, chair of the Presidential Search Committee, the bank's board of directors, and CEO of Quench USA Incorporated. Next to Tony is Charmaine Matlock Turner, search committee member, deputy chair of the bank's board of directors, and CEO of the Urban Affairs Coalition.
Thank you.
And next to Charmaine is Tom Daniels, our senior lead consultant with Spencer Stuart. So this is our panel for this evening. So let's jump right in. The role of the bank president is a unique one. The video briefly touched on it. So Tony, as chair of our search committee, can you say more about what a Reserve Bank president does?
Well, I think the video mentioned she or he is the CEO of the institution. We have some 900 and change employees who are part of the bank here, one of the 12 across the country. And so there's a pretty sort of normal executive level leadership role that is the day-to-day job, assisted by a first vice president who's the chief operating officer. And we had the opportunity to recruit and promote Jeannie Rentezelis into that position here last year. And the two of them in partnership then run the operations of the bank. The bank, though, the system has over the past decade or two become more thoughtful as a fiscal entity running its operations. If you imagine payment systems, for example, have been modernized. And so as that has happened, IT systems have been modernized. As that has happened, they've centralized some of those functions. And so the presidents of each of the district banks then operate as a committee or a series of committees that then have oversight over those functions. Pat Harker, for example, oversees IT on behalf of the presidents in leading that committee. And so the role is the chief executive of our bank, but also responsible for system-wide functions as a delegated authority from the Board of Governors. The most I don't know that it's the most important, certainly the most visible role is maker of economic policy, right? Of monetary policy rather than not economic, specifically not economic policy. And that is as a member of the Federal Open Markets Committee, the FOMC that you would have read about. Philadelphia is one of many banks that rotates in and out. But as one of the 16 members sitting around the table with Chair Powell, our president has a significant voice and influence over the decision on what to do with the dual mandate. And our board then is delegated responsibility within that to participate, representing you all in our communities. And then I'd say the last part of the president's role is, in order to be able to represent, is to be a community leader, to be someone who has the ability, capability. We'll talk about job description a little bit later, but this is someone who's got to be intimately familiar with what's going on in our district. And our district is Southern Jersey, Northern Delaware, and then pretty much from Central PA east to here in the hub in Philadelphia. And so Pat has, in doing all four of those jobs, excelled enormously. And we'll get into that again a little bit later. But that is, it's a big job. It's a hard job. He's been doing it for 10 years. And so we have our work cut out for us to find an adequate replacement.
Indeed. Charmaine, anything you'd like to add to your thinking around this process in the world?
Tony has certainly touched on, I think, the main points when you sort of read the 11-page job description. So I'm sure all of you have done that, right? You have a really good idea about all of the jobs and responsibilities. But what I think is really, really important is that imagine all the different audiences that you have to talk to, right? You're talking about going to Washington, okay, and talking to leaders at the national level about what you see in your district and how that ultimately should affect decisions around interest rates and other kinds of decisions. Where do we put the research? Where should the focus ultimately be? So that's critically important. But you also have to be able to say, I'm independent. This is the information that we see, and even though there may be pressures coming from certain constituencies or, God forbid, political pressure of any kind, right? To be able to step away from that and to be able to say, this is a place where we're making quality decisions based on the best information. The thing is to make sure that you have enough broad information. So that's one of the good reasons why I'm excited about being one of the members of the board, is that, everybody knows here I'm not a banker. I do run a big corporation. Let me say that. I do, Tony, right? Mm-hmm. I do run a big nonprofit corporation, but I really sort of bring a sense of what the community is thinking and feeling about the economy. And you need someone who is able to, go to Washington, talk with all the big economists, all the big business leaders across the country, but at the same time to be able to hear and be able to connect with the person who says to me, look, I really think that, the price of food is way too high and I ultimately can't afford it. How does the Fed hear or think about my ideas? And so I think for someone to come into this role, you have to be willing to see the value and the humanity and the power that everybody in our district has. And it's not just this group or that group. It is every voice, and to make sure there's a system that every voice can be heard.
Thank you so much for that, Charmaine and Tony. Tom, as our senior consultant with Spencer Stuart, I know this is not your first time in a process like this, but maybe for our audience here, describe a little bit of the role you'll have with us in the process, and maybe even your approach to casting a wide net from a diversity and talent perspective as you go through the search process.
Sure, that's a great question. So I'd say our job is primarily threefold. One is to facilitate the process. Two is to assist with outreach. And third is to help with diligence. And I can go into each one of those. In terms of the process, we want to make sure that it's open, it's transparent, and it's inclusive. And our job is to try and bring rigor and discipline. And we've had the fortune to do a number of these over the years. And so we can also bring lessons learned from other projects. In terms of outreach, we want to make sure that this is a national search. And there's already a lot of interest in this from broad groups of leaders from across the country. This is not just 3rd District, Philadelphia, New York, Washington. There's people all over the country that are interested in this. So the people in this room and the people on the broadcast should feel really, really excited. And thirdly is diligence. These are incredibly important roles. There is extensive vetting that has to happen, not only in terms of people's experiences, but also doing discrete referencing, but also things like dealing with trailing spouse issues, because a lot of times these require relocation, or it could be someone who maybe is very interested in public policy but hasn't served in the Federal Reserve System. And so there's a lot of financial considerations that have to be you have to make sure that that is being done kind of behind the scenes. In terms of the question about running a inclusive process and making sure it's a diverse pool. We do several things on that front. Number one, it's having public forums like this. Like, we love these because we want to hear from people in the 3rd District. And this is the second of 3 things that we're doing. There's a lot on the website. There's an email address. We want ideas. And sometimes the ideas come out of these forums. When we talk about diversity, we obviously want to have the most qualified, best individual ultimately become the president. But when you think about diversity, it's things like educational background, it's professional background, it's gender, it's ethnicity, it's race, but it's also diversity of opinions. So our job is also to make sure that the search committee sees a pool that represents all of those. So that's really, really important. And the last thing I'll say is diversity, when it talks about backgrounds, it could be business leaders, it could be bankers, it could be community leaders, or it could be people from public policy, or as the video said, maybe even people that work from the Fed, or it could be someone like Pat who came from an academic institution. And again, it's not just Philadelphia, it's not just 3rd District, but it's national.
Thank you, Tom. So we've talked a little bit about the process, highlight a bit about the role. Tony and Charmaine, I'm going to come to you on this particular question. When we think about the skills, the attributes, things that you're looking for in this next president, I'd be curious to your thoughts about what that means to you and maybe for the audience to hear.
Well, I'll start. I mean, I think the attributes, number one, is a real commitment to this independent system. This is an important part of the American way of life. And so it has to be someone who says, number one, that they believe in this and they see its value to all of us, not just to Wall Street or not just to particular large institutions, but again, that this affects all of us, making decisions around what things will cost and who gets an opportunity for opportunity ultimately really matters. So I think it's someone who really has the experience of really working across the aisles with all kinds of different people and really ultimately values them and what they ultimately bring to the table. And I think it's having some of those experiences. It's one thing I used to tease a friend of mine. I'd say, okay, now is this going to be real or is this an AOP? AOP is an articulator of the problem, as opposed to someone who has actually been a part of helping to work on and solve problems. So I'm looking for someone who not only has really great ideas on how to really represent this district really well, but is really willing to hear and listen and then be able to take those ideas to the broader system and have credibility that they hear our voices.
Thank you.
I think a way I think of that same thing, Charmaine, would be sort of servant leadership. So Pat is a great example of this. Coming from academia, where you have sort of oftentimes responsibility without all the authority, there's a lot of influencing even of people who are theoretically below you in the org chart. And so he's quite good at making sure that he's making smart decisions for all the people around him. Something perhaps a little bit different than some of what Tom has done in St. Louis and others is, Philly and the district are unique. And we're going to talk about that, hopefully hearing from you quite a bit tonight. And I think the main thing that I'm looking for there is authenticity we may or may not find somebody who's from here who has family ties or otherwise, knows Philly, though. The Phillies are losing 1-0 so far. Hopefully it'll be somebody who cares about that. But
I'll add that to the list.
It's got to be authentic, right? It's got to be. It can't be fake. We don't tolerate that. We don't do well with that. And so I'm looking for someone that has that particular characteristic. Then you look at all the leadership characteristics. Great communicator, clearly has to know enough about economics to be able to be a policy driver. But I think what you're hearing from the two of us is there are other characteristics of this human being that are going to be more important to us than does this person have the third PhD from wherever.
Thank you for that. So we like to make this an engaging session and hear and listen to you. So I'll pose that same question to our audience here. And while we're thinking about that, and as I'll come to some folks here in the audience, for those online, just a reminder, you can utilize Slido to type your questions in. Marion will do her best to relay those out to me, and I'll do my best to grab it and replay it for you. So here in the audience, when we think about skills, attributes, maybe even experiences from your lens as leaders here, I'm curious to your thoughts. I'll come to a couple folks first, but please feel free, anyone, to jump in. Donna, I got my eyeballs locked on you, so you're my first choice.
I should have noticed that.
Donna was
former school teacher.
There we go. My mother's a school teacher. There we go.
We've had the opportunity at Pew to work really closely with the Fed over the last couple of years. And I think one of the things that I admire the most is the way under Pat's leadership that they've centered equity and in the research and in the work that they're doing. And I think that's really important for us to look for in the next president as well.
Thank you for that, Donna. Jesse, your thoughts? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to chime in.
You bet.
So I've had the opportunity to work with the Fed over about 15 years, a number of different initiatives, cohorts, other things, mostly based on my community development background. And having the opportunity to really understand the Fed's prioritization of community and understanding the community has, I think, played a big role in bringing resources and opportunities to the communities that I've been a part of in different ways than I ever would have thought, in the early days of that relationship. And reading through the job description, which I think was very well done, very comprehensive, really three things rose to the top for me. One was curiosity, having a leader who is truly wants to understand the people and places within the district that they're serving. Across the country as well, I think, but to even more of an extent, just like Tony was mentioning, just the authentic curiosity of understanding their place. And that is the third district and the people who live there, their neighbors, right? Keeping that connection to the people that you're making policy for is critical, I think, in a role like this. And to that end, agility was the other thing that kept coming to mind. Like, so I kind of think of this dance floor and balcony framework, right? So someone who's doing policy all the time is on that balcony a lot, looking at big picture, having to speak on behalf of many people, but also really being agile enough to get down to the dance floor and do the work, roll up their sleeves, understand who they're working with, their colleagues and the communities that they're in is a big difference. So being really agile in that. And I think the last was going back to community, just really having someone with that demonstrated experience of rolling up their sleeves, understanding what it's like to live in community, to serve in community. I love that the servant leadership comment, because I think that's critical. And I think that's what's been demonstrated over the last decade. I would love to see that continue. And also on community front, giving communities the tools that they need to succeed. I think the Fed has a really unique opportunity to play a role that's just different than anybody else can play in communities like ours in Scranton and northeastern Pennsylvania, to bring people together in ways that nobody else can. And it's been really effective in being able to provide data, insight, and really momentum for communities. And I think having somebody who really understands how to kind of pull those levers and make that work is really a priority for me.
That's fantastic. Thank you both for your comments. Sheila, how are you this evening? Good to see you. So with what we've heard and what the panel said, anything else that maybe comes to mind when you think about skills, experiences, attributes of this role?
So I'll echo Jesse and Donna. President Harker's fan club is enormous.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Because it's authenticity. You've heard that from both Donna and Jesse. It's a feeling that you get from President Harker, that he is really in the space, in the room with you, understands, is listening, knows what it is that you're talking about in some way. I think that comes from a genuine kind of self-awareness of the cultural context that he is in. Right? He does not pretend to be anything other than what he is, while he is in a context sometimes that is completely the opposite of who he is. And I've seen him navigate those roles in a way that was just impressive in a lot of different ways. And I would say the last attribute that I think we skip over a lot of times in the conversation is someone who has that courage, to be themselves, to be unafraid in this space, right? But to be willing to listen and to understand what needs to be said, right? I think the way he took that stance in a very courageous way, he gave you the opportunity to speak truth to power, right? Which is seldom offered in some of the rooms that we are in.
Thank you so much for that.
That's great.
Any other thoughts or comments from folks here in the room before we go to our Slido questions? Anything else? Yes, Susan.
Well, I just want to echo having worked with the Fed for decades, want to underline the importance of this Philadelphia Fed and its long tradition of working with unions. So the importance of the leader of this Fed in being a listener and a voice and an actor, because we've been fortunate and of course exemplary in leadership for the Philadelphia region, the wider region, but the city as well, and having those roles met. In a sense, it's leadership for the people. That's really, in some ways, I think, the unstated mission. It has to be the mission, because otherwise, what is the purpose? So all the other purposes, which of course as your finance are of course key, but you can't have that without having the trust and the engagement of people for the futures of the future community. And I want to underline how important the Philadelphia Fed has been in those conversations. And the challenges of today, because today we still have, in spite of much that has been accomplished in community development, we have housing issues, which are nationwide and here as well. We have racial gaps in home ownership. We have gaps in opportunity. And if someone doesn't speak to this, they will not be viewed as an effective leader for the people. And Philadelphia has taken this role, not just for the Philadelphia region, but for the nation. It's been a leader for decades in this. So it would be a loss to the nation if we don't continue to support that. And I think it's quite likely that that will be supported going forward. Some of those people who are here, and because I'm sure you will find the right person who will be able to do all of these, we'll be excited to do.
Thanks for the challenge, Susan.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, Andrew.
I just wanted to piggyback on both Sheila and Susan and just sort of say, I think one of the other remarkable aspects of Pat's leadership has been to be a leader without being the sort of in the spotlight. And in some cases, we've seen in some bank presidents, even accidentally becoming distractions, through their leadership style or perhaps errors. And, we've had very steady leadership where Pat has not done anything to distract from the mission and has in fact supported others to lead in that mission.
I saw one more hand and then I'll go to our folks online. Marquita.
Thank you. Perfect piggyback to Andy is also not being a distraction, but also investing in other leadership and team building and building a really strong and powerful team. It's not lost on me that when President Harker set foot into the bank, he was flanked by 2 Black women. And that was more than just symbolism, seeing Deborah Hayes in a significant role, vesting power in that role, investing in Teresa Singleton's function and her team. A budget is a moral document. So seeing those investments made in Teresa Singleton's team was a big signal, and watching it grow from 5 staff to how many now, right? And being a place where we got to see research around economic mobility and occupational segregation. So it's also bringing a really strong team to the table and stepping back and ceding power to folks who otherwise have not had opportunity to be faces of the bank system.
Fantastic. Marion, I'm going to go to you and see if we have any feedback, comments from our virtual participants.
Absolutely. So I think there are a few things in here that the panel has already touched upon, including some of the specific qualifications that we're looking for, and all of your feedback has been on that as well. There's a part 2 to that question that the person had said, what kind of macroeconomics or monetary policy experience is a prerequisite for this role?
Let's talk about that, Tony.
Yeah. I tried to characterize it as there's a certain level of competence and comfort with the subject matter. But I'll note that Pat is a doctor, has a PhD, but it's not in economics, and was a dean at Wharton and clearly surrounded himself and was able to acquit himself in the company of brilliant PhDs and other people, including the many here at the bank, without necessarily having to be the person who did the research, who wrote the papers. Mm-hmm. And so if I listen through, common threads of all the feedback from the group here, I think you agree that that kind of leader isn't always, doesn't have to be the person who's on CNBC in the morning, referring to a paper they wrote 20 years ago, which is great. And some do that. Tom, you fired, but the other them, that's fantastic. And we need a few of those, but maybe not here, right? So I don't know. So, in a perfect world, our unicorn may have all of those credentials and also these other characteristics. But there is certainly, I think what you're hearing is a sense of weight towards replicating Pat's ability to do all these other things, while certainly representing well and understanding economic policy sufficiently to be a voting member of the FOMC.
We talk a lot about the understanding piece of the bank, of policy. Charmaine, I'm going to come to you for your perspective as a leader here in this area, in this district, in this region. What do you believe is important for the next president to understand about this city, this region, our district? What comes to mind when I pose that to you?
Yeah, I think it's important for them to realize that this is a region. A lot of times when we call it the Philadelphia Fed, people think that it's just Philadelphia, but it's not. It is other parts of Pennsylvania, as we know, Scranton, Pennsylvania, where my sister lives, and also the entire state of Delaware and southern New Jersey. So this is a interesting area that we're covering 3 states. And so you're looking for what are the issues that may be unique to a particular area and feeling comfortable to say, okay, I think that this is really happening in a more rural or industrial space, but also looking for the linkages between those areas. Like, what do we need to do in order to strengthen the economy of the entire district? And it may look similar in some places, but it may look different. And I think having the ability to not only think of an urban part of the district, which of course is very important, but also the rural parts of the district, as well as smaller cities. How do we make sure that we're staying engaged in that? So that means it's not an easy thing to do, but it is so critical, I think, for us not to be isolated about what the challenges are within the economy. And I think the beauty of the 3rd district, though we're not the largest, we are one of the most diverse as it relates to having rural, urban, suburban people that are a part of the conversation that need to be incorporated as we're ultimately thinking about what are the best policies, what's the best research that we should engage in, and how do we ultimately make sure that the economy is strong for everyone.
Thank you.
If I can add one thing on that.
Sure.
Then an interesting fact is probably 2/3 of the current Reserve Bank presidents did not originally come from their districts. However, a lot of them have ties. They went to school here, they had family members, they have relatives, they have parents, that sort of thing. So we also look for that. But the key thing for those who don't, that's where the board of directors and that's where the community leaders can really help this person really immerse themselves. Because to what Tony and Charmaine said earlier, just engagement and intellectual curiosity, and you want to have someone who wants to get to know the district. Mm-hmm. And so that's where everybody in this room can really help out as well. Because if they don't come from the district, we hope that you're going to help them get there very quickly.
And I think, Tom, I'll pivot a bit off of that and talk about within the district. And we have such a fantastic audience here as we think about opportunities or challenges from the lens that you're living in and seeing every day. What comes to mind for someone to understand or to know as the president here? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What do you see as someone needing to understand about the lives that you touch and impact every day? Yeah, Susan, and I'll come to...
For a city.
the largest, poorest city? Yes. Yes. Okay. Yes,
Aaron?
To Charmaine's point around being able to flex between topographies and different locations, and to the point around creating linkages, that trend spotting, so being able to say, okay, poverty is actually a regional issue. I know Philly has that unfortunate designation, but I would challenge us to travel to the center of this state. I would challenge us to travel to Atlantic County in South Jersey, and you will see kind of those same indices of poverty, even though what they look like in their lived experience may vary. And so to the extent that we are able to both leverage nuance of location to really drive larger conversations about applicable solutions across a multitude of circumstances, that can continue to position the Fed of Philadelphia as this national leader, because to Charmaine's point, not everybody has that mix of circumstances, even if they're fighting towards the same cause.
Right. Yes, Pilar.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Aaron was saying and to what Marquita said earlier, is that I think that is the value of the qualitative research that the Fed has done, the work around worker voice. Yes, our area is very diverse in terms of this region, but that worker voice and hearing people's stories that the numbers might not show you, some of those similarities that are across the board. And I think this is what Marquita was saying with empowering Teresa's team and really being able to think of the Fed from the city's perspective. It's so great to have partners that you are able to, that their research can inform our policy, and that without that kind of qualitative research, we can see the numbers, but the stories behind it can tell a different story.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a really important addition.
Right. And
Pedro?
just to, I'm sorry, I just wanted to just sort of emphasize the point that Susan was talking about as it relates to poverty. The community development function of this organization is critical. At the work that Teresa has done, the research areas that we've done to take a look at what is the data telling us? What are the voices of people telling us? I think it's been a critical function. And as we move forward, it is the idea of having some shared understanding of what the information is that can ultimately help drive some of the policy. We're like living, unfortunately, in spaces where people are very divided around what they believe. And a lot of times the information that they're willing to attach to may only be information, whether it's true or not, that focuses in on reinforcing whatever their ideas are. Here is a place where real policy and research and study is being done and has the kind of sense that I can trust that information. I can believe that information. So I would hope that as we're continuing this work, that's going to be an important part of what I'm going to be looking at to make sure that we're continuing, especially in this age of too often misinformation or disinformation, that there's a place that you can trust that the information that is being developed is there, and that we will continue to tell you what we know and what we don't know, and that our leader will embrace that.
Pedro, and then I would check in with our folks online if we have any comments. Pedro?
A couple things. I think, you've got in the About Philly category, and that, by the way, you guys got this. I mean, it's been the synthesis and the understanding's been fantastic. And on the perennial Philly dynamic, I think one, there is this attribute that lots of folks have touched on, which is that it's a place that wants to know who you are and where you've been, and they care more about that than your title or what the immediate transaction is. In many places, that stature transaction can get you to the trust and to the action. Here, and Pat, because of the many hats he wore in this area, sort of had a little bit of a head start in reputation and a lot of social capital that he was. So in terms of like coming in, what was described as the willingness to invest in being able to sort of build relationships and trust and, and make sure that enough time is dedicated to that. Sometimes that sort of gets rushed, and then folks don't understand, why they. The other thing that's not perennial, I think would have been described as a perennial about Philly, and I think it really has changed and is changing, is the appetite, the willingness for collaboration.
Yeah.
It's a place, and I'm talking here more of the metro Philly area, which is what I know best. I've never had a bad experience at Scranton. But, you've got sort of great places doing great things, but not necessarily the history of collaboration that you've had. And if I were going to plot that, I'd say, that's trending really well, but it's not a foregone conclusion. So having another person of that spirit and ability in that leadership ecosystem would be terrific in an institution like this. And then the other kind of the more like now and into the next several years, and I would venture to say through the next 10 years, next week, Raj Chetty of the Opportunity Insights is going to be in town, and adjacent to the idea of the poorest big city, we're going to have a lot more attention around being the metro area, U.S. metro area, that's sort of 50 out of 50 in economic mobility. And you have institutions between the Fed, Pew, and the universities, the companies that are headquartered in this region and in the district. What an opportunity to seize, right? To come in with an agenda to be part over a 10-year period of leading, if a 10-year tenure leading with the district in a very different place. So I think that's somebody that could come in and really bring additional energy, additional collaboration, and be sort of willing to bring that to kind of quickly earn or bring that trust could be a really exciting thing. I think you guys are in a terrific position.
Catalyst for momentum, right? Yeah. Andy, then Sonia.
Just to sort of build on that a little bit, I think it's important for whoever comes in as leader to recognize a little bit of this sort of this parochial aspect of, that we don't act as a region. You have Delaware, South Jersey, you have Philadelphia, you have the collar counties, and, so on, and, Bethlehem and Lehigh County sort of maybe work together. I don't know that Luzerne and Lackawanna County do. But I'll say, and that's the way it's been. But I will say that it's changing whether people like it or not, in part, not so much for economic mobility as geographic mobility. Yeah. And whether we like it or not, particularly immigrants, particularly variety of both Puerto Rican and immigrant Latino residents, both coming here as their first destination, coming from New York. The whole region is experiencing that. But we're dealing with a political infrastructure, an economic infrastructure, and a physical infrastructure that was all built, for the most part, before any of us were born. And we're just fortunate from the physical infrastructure perspective that all of our storm damage has been localized. But our physical infrastructure is just waiting for the right wolf to come in and blow it down. And this is, you see it in the poverty geography mapping of, the fact that our affordability really relies on the fact that we have aging and adequate housing stock. We're not building new things, and we're also not building new infrastructure to get to that region that Charmaine was talking about. There's an opportunity for the Fed to play a leadership role in helping to build all three of those, pieces of infrastructure.
Love that. Marion, any comments from our guests on Slido?
Yeah, so I just want to acknowledge, I think there's a number of comments that either the panel or the folks in the room have already brought up or we've addressed in some fashion, but just to reiterate some of them, several comments about the value of the community development work, including, a hope from some of the commenters that some of the existing programs, whether it's economic mobility, reinventing our communities, or some of those might be things that the new president would see continuing or expand upon in some fashion. Comments around, will there be an opportunity to fill the position with someone from the current district? I think we've talked about that. I think that there was a nice build on to Pedro's comments around collaboration. Someone was saying how important that's been during President Harker's tenure. How is the selection committee considering demonstrated examples of collaboration in the candidate's experience as you evaluate them?
So that's a question. The demonstrator we've heard here tonight, a collaborator, someone who's making those linkages, coalition builder, right? How are you thinking about those skills, those experiences as we embark on this search?
Well, somebody said it, and I think it's really important. It matters more what you've actually done than what your title is or where you've been. And so a lot of our job will be to get to know these people well enough through direct interviews, but then also through a lot of background work with colleagues throughout the system and outside the system, and with the help of Spencer Stewart, to identify circumstances and instances that we can then probe on to understand more deeply how have they acted, what have they actually done, as opposed to what their title might indicate or where they might appear. This, if you imagine, we're going to have a chunk of people who are going to come in who will come with academic credentials, and that's terrific. But where did you decide to dedicate your time and effort in terms of the research that you were doing? And does that line up with the kind of research that we would enjoy continuing to do here going forward, given the success that we've had along the lines of what many of you have said? So I think there are ways, whether it's from business and banking or community or government or the actual system, to be able to peel back the onion for each of these types of people to understand, are these people of action, of collaboration? And we will be doing a lot of reference work to make sure that it's not just somebody's self-opinion or their ability to present themselves, but the fact that other people around them in the communities are putting them forward. And Tom, you could mention, we've gotten a lot of submissions already, a lot of applications, many of which are coming from other people saying, hey, I think this person would be terrific. Yeah, that's a good start, right? That's a good place to begin.
Yeah, and kind of following up on what Tony was saying, I think there's at least three ways that you can vet that. One is you look for examples. And as Tony was saying, you got to peel back the onion. Like, okay, how did you do this? What was the outcome? Who else was involved? And how do they speak? Do they speak like we or do they speak I? It's just like there's little things along the way. The second is reputation. The good news is there's a lot of seasoned professionals, but there's also a lot of up-and-comers, and people leave breadcrumbs throughout their whole life. Sure. And so part of what happens is you develop a reputation. And then thirdly is a lot of referencing. And it's not just the references they give you, it's the references that are like off-piste and people that would be in a position to know them. And it's not just superiors, but it's peers and subordinates, because that's how you really understand the essence of someone. It's through referencing.
Thank you. I'd like to, yes. Sorry.
I was just writing a note about that particular question around the formal asks for references and then the informal. So it's really good to hear they are asking or plan to ask about the candidate's formalized professional relationships in a 360 perspective, but then also those quiet references that may not have the best things to say about that particular candidate, maybe further back in their careers and what they've learned from that and adjusted and pivoted. So that's actually really wonderful to hear. And I just want to call out one thing that I heard you say in your response, just to think about, which is the we versus I. Because as you look at a diverse candidate pool, women are form or a culture to say we versus I. So just think about that in terms of who is showing up, presenting the most vibrant examples of leadership in your candidate search, because women are very much we are told to be a we people, despite the fact to the contrary, when it very well may have been an I.
Well, the other thing is, we do a lot of research on this. A lot of times women feel they have to be 120% qualified and men only 50%. So we're very sensitive to unconscious bias, and this committee is very, very attuned.
Yes, very attuned.
Thank you.
So I wanted to give us a bit of a time check. We're sort of coming into the home stretch. I do want to give a moment here to get some questions from you. And please know that even though we'll come to a conclusion at 6:30, I'm not rushing anywhere. I don't think the panel, well, Tony might leave because of the Phillies game, but we do want to make sure you all know that we'll be here. But I do want to give you an opportunity with folks here in the room and certainly our participants on Slido. What questions do you have about either what you've heard so far or other questions generally about the process and what we're embarking upon? Yes.
Good evening. I'm Michael Curran. I, like Jesse, am from Scranton, run a community health system up in Scranton. My comment would be to kind of echo what Alex said. I'm fairly new to being involved with the Fed. I joined the Anchors for Equity project that's at work up in Scranton. It's opened my eyes to the Fed in a lot of ways. I think the thing that I'm finding extremely important and the opportunity that our current president obviously seized on and can move forward is the Fed as the convener to solve difficult problems. And what I mean by that in particular, and I've said this in other forums, is I'm the CEO of a hospital. My job is to take care of the community, but really I go up to work every day trying to beat an opponent who is the other hospital in town. And I think there's some value to that. You know, we're all some level of capitalism here. But I think the Fed is in a unique position to create venues, and I don't want to say with teeth, but with real influence, to say there are some problems we have to solve together. There are some problems that competitors have to sit down and look at a bigger picture. And I really have found the Anchors for Equity to be a version of that I respect gratefully. And I would hope that whoever we hire values that. The research is credible because it's coming from the Fed. And so if you've got competing executives looking at it, you kind of have to agree and say, okay, well, what are we going to do now? It kind of cuts through the nonsense to the action. And so that's something I think is really important. And I guess what I would ask is, when I go back to Scranton and I try to explain to people what this was, what can I do to help? And how can I best be a conduit? I feel this responsibility now after being here that I'm representing a community. I want to do that effectively. And so if there's any way anything I should be doing or any information I can bring back, I think that would be really helpful for me here tonight.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. And Tom touched on it a little bit, but go away and think about who are people that you know or that you might know of that we should be interested in. Something great about a search as wide as this is that we're going to get to talk to a lot of people who probably are only 50% or maybe are 150% qualified, but it informs our interviewing process, right? It helps us shape getting to the finish. This is a multi-month, dozens, if not hundreds of interviews kind of process. So don't hesitate to put forward anyone that you think is, somebody that should be considered. That would be helpful.
Right. And I would just add to that, talk to other people, let them know this is not a secret meeting where of course you guys are all like super special, so that's not the question, but talk to other people and let them know you were here and that get feedback from them so that you can ultimately give us feedback, as well as telling other people that this is an open process. We do want suggestions about potential candidates. We have a professional here, so trust that he and his team know how to ultimately vet the process. But the reason that this is open is not just for us to have conversations, but it's to really take this information, reach out to your own networks, talk to the people, wow, I was at this meeting last night. They're really having an open process. If you had to choose someone within your network, who do you think should be a potential candidate? Or can you ultimately talk to other people and then ultimately, refer them to where they can get information? But that's why we're doing this. It's not just to have this wonderful conversation and have your time and energy around this. It's about hoping that you will be ambassadors for this process and really reach out to others, share your experiences, share what you heard today, as well as to make referrals or to let other people know to feel very comfortable to make referrals as well.
Right. And I would just add to that, just if you can provide context to the extent you're suggesting someone, just because we do get a lot of them, but it's really helpful. And take a look at the spec. And if you don't have the email address, it's philfedpresident@spencerstewart.com, but it's also on the website. Sheila?
So it's an interesting dynamic to have a president for 10 years like President Harker. But it's very different today than it was 10 years ago. And it's difficult to follow a superstar like President Harker is. How are you thinking around what we need today? And is it time for something different? And what would that differentiator be?
Great question.
So we haven't really talked about it. It wasn't really the topic for this group, but I mentioned at the beginning that the system itself has changed over this period of time and continues to change and evolve. And we've actually had 3 events, Tom. The third was an employee event. So we had our community development group and then the employee event. And the employee event, some of what the employees of the Fed, who I feel we're responsible for as a board, wants to know, is this going to be someone who's going to promote job growth and opportunity for my career right here? That's part of the leadership job. And in this changing system, one of the things that is different from a decade ago is that we want someone who can bring innovation and creativity to the role that the Philadelphia Fed can play within the entire system. So Pat's done wonderfully in representing and hasn't done anything wrong in terms of representing Philly generally, but our employment has shrunk a little bit. And so how do we distinguish ourselves? And we've started work. I mentioned bringing Jeannie Rentezelis in as first vice president last year, and she's already begun amongst her peer group of first vice presidents around the country to figure out where can we carve out areas where we can contribute to the whole system in areas in and around, for example, IT and data management, big data management. We're doing a lot of work for the system already. How do we extend our lead in an area that, the Fed, like every other business, every other organization, is struggling with AI, and where is this going? And how do we manage our big data? And what is that, by the way, right? And everything's got to go to the cloud. And we could definitely, in the next decade, become the hub, the center that could create a huge opportunity. Connecting that to the community then would be the next step, right? How do you then further engage that it's not just here at the Fed inside the building that we have these capabilities, but we've tapped into the educational and other technology firms and opportunities that we have locally so that we can create that. So I'd say that's one thing that's on my mind that's a big difference from 10 years ago. I think the matters that we mostly talked about, regional collaboration and sort of authentically, kind of intuitively understanding how to communicate and how to connect, how to be out there. What Pat and the team did, in fact, we just wrapped up our 72nd field meeting. How many field meetings did we do? 79 field meetings. These are meetings. Pat doesn't go to all of them, but he goes to a ton of them. And so as I listen to you, I'm refining this into questions and circumstances, case studies that we can present to our candidates to say, do you have the time and energy and interest to go visit 79 little towns around the region? Because you can't just sit here in your great office and have sushi all day long. The staff tells me that the sushi was especially for you.
Pretty good. We should do this tomorrow.
Please.
Part in the infrastructure that Andy mentioned earlier. I'm Karnisha Quashie from ECO. The data centers piece and the innovation and infrastructure piece is really, really important, because while community will be engaged, while companies will try to solve for the capacity and what the need is, there's also the utility companies and the telecommunication companies that are actually responsible for creating the infrastructure to bring new businesses in and to support existing businesses with AI and all the other intelligences and infrastructures that we'll need. So my hope would be that that president would be engaging in some of the employers that are really responsible in there with the evidence of community development, economic development, but also the core businesses that actually play a very key role in attracting other businesses to take a chance on our region to help foster that economic development. So to me, it would be really helpful for someone who has evidence of turning an area that gets a lot of no's into a yes through their policy, through their research, through their advocacy. If that is possible, I think that would be a game changer, and we would no longer be the poorest city in America. And so how can that person be innovative and inspiring and motivating to help us change our narrative, because they have the know-how, the background, and the results to get people to coalition build and transform community.
So I want to go to two more comments. Andy, I see your hand, and then Donna, I saw your hand earlier, and then we'll draw to a close here of the official program, but yet we'll still continue on afterwards. Andy?
Actually, Carnisha, I thought you were going to maybe say what I'm about to say. So, which is, I think what you mentioned about sort of data and AI and so on, because this is the bank that in some ways is the center of labor studies, I think also as much as possible to center what can we do to lead, particularly around whether it's AI or other automation, or just even changes since the pandemic on our modes of work. How do we make sure that we center residents and workers in a way that they're benefited through this, and grow our employment, as opposed to, somebody else who sort of has a different focus. AI may transform our financial markets to the detriment of our workers. Yeah. And I think if this bank president and this bank can continue to lead on centering, the benefit of our employees and our employers, that would be really powerful.
Thank you for that. Donna?
Can I make a quick connection? I really like that. And I think it's important for you all to know that a really important part of the job, and something Pat's done really well, is threading the needle of ensuring that all the research and all the community work has a pretty clear connection to monetary policy and the dual mandate. Given, Charmaine mentioned earlier, the political environment and the independence of the Fed, which is so precious, so important to us. This person has to be very thoughtful and careful about how to do that. Pat's done wonderfully well, but that was a great point, that I think everything we do has to come back to how do we create employment, right? How do we improve wages? How do we manage prices? How do we manage inflation? And that way we're staying well within the lanes that, we're expected to as part of the federal system.
Donna.
I know we're almost out of time. There was a comment from someone on Slido I just wanted to acknowledge about how the candidate age factors in. So we have an FAQ on the website. The Fed does have very specific policies around term limits and retirement dates related to the candidate's age when appointed. So the best place to get that answer is just direct on our website. And we are at 6:33. So I think I'm going to turn it back to Kelly to wrap us up.
Speaking my language. Donna, real quick, and then
I'll be very quick.
We'll go to
Really
close.
answered the question I was going to ask. I was saying, we're here as external partners and working with the Fed, but I hadn't heard a question around employees, right? And, the folks that we work with and sort of culture, someone who is going to continue to have build a great culture that's been created here. Because I very selfishly, me and my team at Pew, want to make sure that, Teresa and Ashley and Deborah, are still happy. Continue to do great work with us. But really, I hadn't heard any, talk about ensuring that the person you bring in is really going to continue to strengthen the culture.
Clearly,
what do you think about him?
Yeah, found a fantastic and really important factor. We've all been through leadership transitions. We all have a sense of how hard change management is on people. I am encouraged. I mentioned Jeannie a couple of times, new into the position, but has been in the bank for a dozen years. So she has a lot of that connection, a lot of that representation. And that's a very powerful and important position upon whom the new president will, lean a lot, especially at the beginning. I should mention Kelly, who's been here a year and a half.
Yeah, 2 years into
2 years now. Fantastic new addition, fresh leadership, fresh eyes, but complementing a team of people who've been here for a decade and who know what they're doing. The team works really well together, and you're not surprised by that because Pat's a great leader. So, the good news is this is not a turnaround situation. This isn't, you don't walk down the hallways and it's dead. You walk in, people are looking up, they're saying hello, they're smiling. It's fun. It's valuable work. So I think we're going to be able to find somebody who doesn't feel the pressure or the need to have to reinvent everything. But they have to authentically want to be with people, like people, and, these particular kinds of people. So that's what we'll be looking for.
So I want to just say I would be remiss as we're coming to a close to not thank our communications team, our events team, our food and facilities team for really creating this event tonight. And so a round of applause for the folks that are here. And truly to all of you, this is truly what we wanted, which was to hear and to listen and to gather feedback. And like Tony mentioned, we're in the true final stages of at least the formal engagement. However, the process will continue to evolve and your feedback will continue to be important to us. And so tonight doesn't conclude that. It really is an ongoing relationship. So feel free to share openly and honestly as we continue to embark on this journey. So
Kelly, sorry, please. I thought it was going to come up, so I didn't mention it. In terms of setting expectations of what happens next.
Yes.
Kelly mentioned. Yes. This is sort of the conclusion of the formal outreach. Now, a lot of the work begins to start to sift through a lot of the candidates that have come forward, a little more recruiting. Realistically, we might not have an answer to this, a final a person until April or May timeframe. We're on pace. Pat's pumpkin disappears at the end of June, one way or the other. And so he's very anxious to make sure that we do this well. But therefore, we're not likely to have a lot of outreach to you. So we're not going to be in a position, as you can imagine, with confidentiality and the like, to come out and give you updates. Know that doesn't mean that we're not interested in talking and communicating, but we most likely won't have much to say after this until we're ready to kind of present who we've selected. I hope that's okay.
With that, thank you.
Thank you all.
And have a good evening. Thank you.